and welcome to day 185 of Bible 365. If you have never been here before, Bible 365 is a reading through the Bible in 365 days using the chronological Bible reading plan from oneyearbibleonline.com. You would download that reading plan and you would just read along. It is free and you can read along with it using your own Bible. So today is day 185. It is July 3rd, and we are in Proverbs 30 and 31, the super famous Proverbs 31. So this is the end of the Proverbs, and this is delivered to us in a time, because remember, we're doing a chronological reading. So this is delivered to us in time where the Israelite kingdom, remember it was broken up into Israel and Judah, and Israel has been taken over by Assyria, and Babylon is currently under King Hezekiah. Now, is this definitely in this kind of chronological order? Not necessarily, but I'm thinking that the person who put this together and the author of the book of Proverbs, what we do know is we know that these were placed after the Proverbs that Hezekiah put in there. So it would make sense that these are in this chronological order, because would they stick the Hezekiah the Hezekiah Proverbs kind of in front of these other Proverbs? That wouldn't necessarily make sense. So I'm thinking that does go chronologically with where we are, but we don't know for 100% certainty the year in which these were written. And also who wrote them, which is also really interesting because both sets of Proverbs are written by people that we have never heard of before, and we actually have no historical data on. So it makes it fascinating to know that they are put in this book. So at one point, they were someone that was deemed important enough that they were giving information that the Israelites needed to know and understand. But that has gone down in history that we don't even know who they are anymore. So we're just going to move on with the reading today, because I was stumped a little bit with some of this reading, not Proverbs 31, but Proverbs 30. It was a little bit confusing. Part of me actually really feels like it should have been a psalm and not necessarily a proverb, but it's really, they're kind of both in that same genre, that both of that same kind of field. So I'm going to just start with the beginning. And what we have here is in verse 1, it says, "The sayings of Agur, son of Jakeh, an inspired utterance." So it's an inspired utterance, which means inspired by God. I'm going to say yes, because he does bring God into this. But it doesn't necessarily say these are the words that God spoke to him, or it's nothing prophetic or anything like that. So he is not even necessarily a king. We don't even have any of that kind of information. So what I did look up and what I did find fascinating was his name, because that's all we have about him. It was his name and then this third name, Ithiel. These are the names that we have that we don't necessarily know who they are. So Agur means gathered. So that's, and the only reason I bring this up and the only reason I feel like it matters is because, nowadays we don't necessarily, and again, I'm talking about the culture in which I live, not the rest of the cultures throughout the world. But in our culture, we don't actually necessarily name kids we don't define them by their name, right? And I say that, I sort of did with my daughter. She's named after fairies, and at that time, I was a little bit into all that fantasy stuff, and so I deliberately named her after fairies, and she's kind of come through with that because she's a little strange. But my other two, really, it meant nothing. And so I don't know if they're named this because their parents named them this, or if their name represents something about their personality, and how they're put in this book is really based on their personality more than their names. Because also what we know about both of these names, because Jakeh is carefully religious, so his son is gathered, as in maybe he's gathering information from his dad, who is carefully religious, right? So he's the son of his dad. And so he's getting this information from somebody who is carefully religious or loves the Lord. It also says that they're both sort of kind of a version of Solomon. So I'm not even sure how that is. I'm not fluent enough in Hebrew to understand how they are sort of related to Solomon, because our Proverbs 31 guy is the same way. So he is also, his name also stands for Solomon. So, or were they just naming him after Solomon, right? There's certainly that aspect to it. All right. So he speaks this to Ithiel, and Ithiel's name is God be arrived. So there's this whole wrapping around of these are important words about God, right? Now, the whole thing is, I don't know, I find the whole thing interesting because he has this pattern in which he speaks, which is, again, why I kind of feel like it's more like a psalm. He's got a pattern in the way he speaks. Like, these two things I don't understand, and this third thing I understand even less. These four things I'm inspired by, and this fifth thing I am even more inspired by. So it's a phrase that has been used on multiple occasions, occasions in the Old Testament. This is a phrase that we don't use anymore, at least, again, in our culture, we don't use it anymore. But it's giving like extra power, it seems, to the phrase. So like, these three things I find interesting. This fourth thing is really, right? So like, it's giving more power to those four things. So it's not just I kind of find this fascinating, right? So anyway, so this is kind of the way in which he speaks, and he's speaking about a whole bunch of different things, but this is how he starts, and I feel that this is the most important thing, because what he's saying, and it actually reminds me of Solomon in when he speaks in Ecclesiastes, and how he's sort of like, everything is vanity, or it's all just a waste, right? Like, if it's not God, then it doesn't matter, right? We try for money, but none of that matters, right? We look at all the nature and the beauty of it, but none of that matters, right? The only thing that really matters is God. It's the only thing that's important. So he starts out in somewhat that same way. He starts out in verse 1, I'm weary, God, but I can prevail. So as a human, he looks around, and the world is wearying. So in some of these things, he says there are three things that are never satisfied, four that never say enough. These things are devastating in some ways. So it's the grave, obviously, when you die, a barren womb, land which never has enough water, and fire which never says enough, right? Fire continues to consume. And so you just look around like, these things are like, they're never enough. They're sucking the life out of things, right? They're making things miserable. Things that are amazing for me. Let's see, what else does he talk about? He talks about ways to not be like. He says things that aren't right. There are three things that makes the earth tremble, right? Three things that are out of order. A servant who becomes a king, a godless fool who gets plenty to eat. And we see all of these things. He's going to say, talking about being wise in that next section. Four things on earth that are small, yet they are extremely wise. So he's talking about wisdom, ants, how wise they are. And all, these animals that show wisdom. And then he talks next about being courageous. Three things that are stately in their stride, at least that's the way I say it, right? Three things that are stately in their stride, four that move with stately bearing. A lion, right? A strutting rooster, a he-goat. So these things sort of like, maybe being courageous is the wrong thing. Maybe it's just that they walk upright, they're really proud, right? And then in the end, kind of how he finishes it, he says, if you play the fool and exalt yourself, or if you plan evil, stop. For churning cream produces butter, and as twisting the nose produces blood, so stirring up anger produces strife. So he just sort of talks about these things of the world. Again, he's presenting us with wisdom, with things of this world, things to notice, things to look at. And yet he starts with, I'm weary, but I can prevail. So overall, I feel like he's struggling. Like, he looks around and he sees all these things, and he's just struggling with all these things. Maybe he's much like Solomon in Ecclesiastes, right? He's older, he's starting to notice things. Right. So one of the things that I liked, because he says he talks about himself, and he says, I'm a brute, not a man. I don't have human understanding. And I'm going to do this comparison because I saw the movie Dune and I read the books. And I know, like, for some of you who know me are probably like, oh my gosh, she's harping on this Dune thing again. One of the things that I loved about the book when I read the book was, I believe that he had this deeply ingrained religion, that he was taught religion because he had some kind of understanding about religion, because the book had a lot of like messianic maybe undertones, right? In the first book we see that it looks like a Messiah was prophesied and then delivered. And I'm telling you all of this because there was this sect of women, they were called Bene Gesserit women, and there was this sect of women, and what they would prophesy, and they would spread out all over the universe, because it was multi-worlds. They would spread out all over the universe, and they would sort of be like I want to say prophets, and prophets is probably the best word. Prophets and helpers with kings and rulers and emperors, and right, there was always a Bene Gesserit in their household, right? And they also had like a little bit of extra strength. They knew how to use wisdom, right? They had all of these extra things. anyway, the whole reason I'm bringing this up is because they would go and they would test people. Like, so if anyone goes, well, this person can possibly be a Bene Gesserit, they would go and they would test them to see if they were human. And so that was their whole deal. Like the regular people weren't human. You were only human if you had some kind of deeper understanding and abilities. And that's actually what made you human. And so I think that him saying this, I thought it sparked that thought in me, that he's essentially like, I'm not enough to be human, right? Like, I'm weary, I'm sad when I look around, I don't have any wisdom, I'm a brute, right? Like, surely I'm only a brute, I'm not a man. And so he's feeling like he doesn't really have enough of what it takes to be human. And of course, God made humanity. And so is he recognizing that brokenness in us, right? Like that sinful nature that we have. And I hate to even use that expression because I know it's a really commonly used expression, but maybe that idea that like, no matter how hard I strive, I still do things that I hate to do, and I have to repent from those things. I still kind of like sometimes like will snap automatically instead of seeing the love for my neighbor. I don't automatically want to love my neighbor, right? I want to love myself instead. So I'm wondering if he's kind of reverting to that, like there's this recognition that deeply in there, he's just not enough. He's not fully human in the way in which that God wanted us to be human, right? God desired for us to be human. And I don't know, I'm just reading this in the way that which I feel like he's talking. I feel like he feels, he's recognizing, maybe feels is the wrong word. He's recognizing he's not what he's supposed to be, right? He's not what he was originally intended to be. And so then he looks around and he sees all of these things too, and recognizing that this is not, and like maybe doing some of these things would help us be more of what we were originally intended to be. So then he talks about God, because he says in verse 4, who's gone up to heaven? He says, I haven't learned wisdom, nor have I attained the knowledge of the Holy One. So he's not like sort of, I'm thinking, he's not in this sort of advanced place, right? He doesn't know everything according to the Lord. Who has gone up to heaven and come down? Whose hands have gathered up the wind? I'm going to say God. And then he says, who has wrapped up the waters in a cloak, and who has established all the ends of the earth? What is his name, and what is the name of his son? Surely you know. Who's he talking about? This was possibly right around the time, or right maybe within a couple of years of Hezekiah. So who's he talking about? Is he talking about mankind? Is he talking about Israel? He could be talking about Israel, right? There's times in the book where Israel says, or where God says, Israel is my son. So is he talking about that? Is he talking about how Israel is supposed to more or less step up to be more godly, right? So is this a cry out to the people of Israel to be more godly? Is he talking about something else? I'm not sure. So, but in here, he's talking about his son. So then he discusses the beauty of God and how he's all flawless. And then he asks for these things. He says for the Lord, keep falsehood and lies from me. Don't give me poverty or riches. Just give me what I need, because otherwise I'm going to disown you if I have too much, and then I'm going to steal and be more broken if I have too little. So that is the thing that he wants. And then he discusses all of these other things that are going on in the world, right? Some of the amazing things of the world. So just to try and understand him better, because again, this one was kind of difficult for me, because I'm thinking, what's his purpose, right? Like, what's his end game? And so maybe I'm thinking it's a cry out to Israel to be more conformed into the image of God. And this is how he sees it happening. And these are the things that he asks God for. So that's Proverbs 30. And then we're going to move on to Proverbs 31. And this is again, so in verse 1, it says the sayings of King Lemuel. Again, another different version of Solomon. It says, an inspired utterance his mother taught him. So this is something he learned from his mom. This is a ridiculously famous proverb. So it's probably one of the ones that you hear the most about. And I want to make a little statement here, because this is, for women, this is the one that we talk about sort of to each other all the time. Are you a Proverbs 31 woman? And we should be more like a Proverbs 31 woman. And I want to teach my children to be more like a Proverbs 31 woman. I don't want to take any of that away. I do, but I don't. But I kind of do. Because this is actually not speaking to women. This is a mother speaking to her son. So this is the mom, and this is the mom essentially saying to the son, this is what I want you to look for. Now, could that kind of float down the river and say, if a king is looking for this kind of woman, it would be lovely for us to be this kind of woman? Absolutely. But what I can say, and what I find more than anything, is one of two things. Woman number one says, wow, a Proverbs 31 woman does everything. I need to do everything. And if I'm not doing everything, then I'm not a Proverbs 31 woman. Woman number two says, well, this isn't a real woman. Like, nobody can do all of these things all the time. So essentially, I'm just going to take what I like and then not take what I don't like. And I'm going to tell you that I think both of those answers are wrong. Now, can we get some of those? And I want to obviously stipulate, this is my opinion. Can I say that there's bits of grains of truth in both of those things? Yes. But to lean on that, I think is dangerous. I think it's dangerous for us as women, and it's dangerous for men to have these expectations, right? Because one, none of us are perfect under the sun, so it would be unrealistic for us to have all of these things all the time. So to teach these, but to teach the idea of these things and the strivings towards the Lord are everything, right? So that's extremely important. So yes, we should be teaching ourselves and our daughters these things, right? Or our daughters in Christ, right? Or sisters in Christ, because there are a lot of women who do not have children, but they're longer in the faith, and they have a massive amount of wisdom to share with the younger generation, or the newer believer younger generation, whatever way you look at it, whether it's physically younger or whether it's younger in the faith. And so I do think that this is wisdom to be used, but not as a checklist. Oh, do I work at the morning and at night? Check. Oh, do I teach my children to love? Oh, do I speak nicely at the gate of my husband, right? Like, these aren't checklists. This is an overwhelming picture of a woman that a mother would like her son to marry. By the way, I have 2 sons. I would love if my son married a woman like this. And the grand finale of this woman is in verse, nope. Of course, now I can't find the verse, where she honors the Lord. Oh, here we go, verse 30. It says, charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. So if you have nothing else in this list, if you have this one, you'll have other things. But if you have nothing else in this list, you want a woman to fear the Lord, right? You want to love a woman that fears the Lord. If you are someone who fears the Lord, you want a woman to fear the Lord, right? So this is what she's desiring for her son. So just to go over a couple of the things, because again, not a checklist, but a couple of things. Actually, I want to start in the beginning, because she teaches him other things as well. She's a good mother. She teaches him good things. Right away, she says, listen and hear me out, right? Which is part of what God says to us all the time. Don't spend your strength on women whose vigor, don't spend your strength on women, your vigor on those who ruin kings. Why would she say this? Well, let's take a look. Go back and look at Solomon. What happened to him? Go back and look at David. What happened to him? Go back and look at, I should have gone David first, because David was first. So David, then Solomon. Go back and look. These are just the ones that we know. Go back and look at Ahab. What happened to him, right? All 3 of these men followed women to their destruction, right? So Solomon, David took, and by the way, this wasn't her fault. But still, he still spent time and energy doing something to a woman that he shouldn't have. So he went and he took a woman that wasn't his own, a woman that was married, right? And so he did things with her that he shouldn't have done. And then we go on to Solomon. Solomon turned away from the Lord because he turned towards his foreign wives' gods. Let's go to Ahab. Ahab already wasn't great, but then he married Jezebel, who brought all of her gods with her and ruled the land essentially with her gods. So that's at least 3 kings that we know that were destroyed because of their wives, right? So this is something that's important. If he is a king in this land, this is an important thing for him to know, and to follow. Don't waste your strength and vigor on somebody who is going to ruin you, right? And the truth of the matter is there are things that are extremely important, and chasing down a woman isn't that thing as a king, right? It is not the most important thing. He is king of all the land. And so then she goes on to say to him, it's not for you to drink wine and crave beer. So what is it for you to do? Don't forget what has been decreed. Speak up for those who can't speak for themselves. Speak up and judge fairly and defend the rights of the poor and the needy. So she didn't leave out any of these important things of what it means to be king. So yes, this major focus is on the end of Proverbs 31, but she's telling him the importance of being a king, right? Put what's important first. And then when you're looking for a wife, this is what you're looking for, right? So don't waste your time and energy on things that you shouldn't. And then I want you to look for a wife that looks like this, right? So there's importance in finding a good wife. And I would agree that that is definitely true. Here are just some of the things that she does. I'm not going to point out any of the verses, but this is what she does. She works diligently, right? She's a diligent worker. She is prudent, so she looks forward to the future, right? So she doesn't just focus on the here and now and spending everything at this moment. So she looks forward to the future. She has skills, so she's able to do things. She's kind. She loves on people. She's respectable, so you can bring her around everybody and everyone will look on her with respect, right? They'll say kind things about her. She speaks well of him, so he knows that when he's not around, she's going to have good things to say about him. She's going to speak kindly to him. She's a diligent mother. So on top of being just a diligent worker, she's also a diligent mother. She does good things with her children, right? And then, of course, most importantly, she fears the Lord, and so she is to be praised, right? So it says, honor her. So on top of, so that once he finds her and all the wonderful aspects she has, he's to honor her for all that she has done. And then let her works bring her praise at the city gates. So he's not hiding her. He's not keeping her down. He's not subduing her, right? He's honoring her and letting all of that shine for anyone to see. So everything about that is good and loving, right? This is not a goal to attain. This is a way to live a life, right? And yes, you know, times and seasons and all that kind of stuff. But as women, doing these things, right, attaining these things about being diligent and then being a kind mother and being kind and being respectable, these are all things we want to do anyway, right? These are all things that we should be striving for, right? And the way to do that is to fear the Lord. That's rule number one. And that's what we want for our sons, for their wives. That's what this queen wanted. Not necessarily queen, but probably, possibly. But that's what this woman, maybe not, she might have been the wife of a king or a concubine of a king, we're not sure, but that's what this woman wanted for her son to find in a wife. That's how we're ending today. Proverbs is over. We're done another book. So if you guys found this to be a blessing, I want you to like it, share it, subscribe to the channel so you get this every day, ring the bell so you get notifications, and keep reading in the meantime. I'll see y'all tomorrow.